Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season 2 of Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me comic writer David Booher, who is the writer behind Canto and the entire Canto series. So welcome to the show.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and sort of chat all things Canto and comics.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited, and I promise everybody we're going to get to Canto, but I do want to talk about some stuff before Canto, because you've done a bunch of other stuff. Some of it's comics, but I know that you came into comics in a unique way, as you were more into the screenwriting side of things first. And so
So you did your homework. I love it.
Yeah, and then so obviously, you sort of are an 80s kid, I think, and you like a lot of the 80s stuff. So
Totally.
How did you get into all of that and even the screenwriting side? Because I think that is super interesting in of itself.
Yeah, I grew up in the 80s, so I loved things like Dark Crystal and Neverending Story, and Return to Oz was one of my favorite movies when I was young, and it was terrifying and I loved it. I started writing probably, I was thinking about this, probably like about 13, 14 years ago now. Nothing really happened. Then I started going to San Diego Comic-Con, and that's when I started getting into comics because I never grew up with comics. What I had for comics was like Mad Magazine. I used to read Mad when I was young, and Far Side and some of the funnies in the newspaper. And so I never really was exposed to the long form comics, including like superheroes and stuff. So I sort of started screenwriting, and then I went to San Diego Comic-Con, and believe it or not, my first foray really into comics was Lock and Key by Joe Hill and Gabe Rodriguez from IDW, which to this day is still my favorite comic of all time. So after I read that, it showed me that what the storytelling possibilities were for comics, and it sort of set my mind racing as to how I could do this. And I pitched my first idea to what was the Wassel brothers, who eventually became Vault Comics. And that's sort of how I got my start. They saw the kernel of an idea and helped me make it a reality. So that was probably 6, 7 years ago now, and here we are.
So to even back up a little bit of that, because I do want to talk about screenwriting and all that stuff, because what was that even like, writing screenwriting stuff, before we get into all the comic stuff and talk about Powerless and a variety of other stuff that's come out? Like, what made you gravitate towards screenwriting? Because obviously screenwriting is in many ways a distant cousin of comics, and I've heard stories of people who started out writing screenplays and wanted to do film and movies, and then they jump into comics and they take like a screenplay and then they adapt it into a comic. And then also there's been a bunch of advice where, oh, you should do something as a comic first and then turn it into a screenplay and all that stuff. So I'm so curious about this because I find it super interesting when people write in different styles and even in different mediums.
Yeah, so I've always loved TV and film, watching it, and I sort of grew up watching movies, horror movies in particular. In the 80s, I would go to the video store and walk up and down the aisle, the horror aisle, and just go through and rent each one. And so I've seen tons and tons of them. That's sort of where the passion has come from. And as far as telling stories, in the sort of movie format, screenplay format, I went to the profession. I was part of the professional program in screenwriting at UCLA. Quite a number of years back now. I think it was 2014, 2015. So I gravitated toward that. But I've come to this very hardened position that comics and screenwriting are two very different things. And people approach me a lot with ideas about for screenplays, or with a screenplay or idea for a movie, and they want to make it into a comic book. And I just, it's
there are different tools in your toolbox.
There's different tools, but there's also different philosophy. And the moment you start understanding that you might tell the same story, but it's going to look different and it's going to need different things in each one of the formats, is when you're going to be more successful. So in both. So I'm working on a project now that's sort of dual tracked, uh, for film and comics, and it's very interesting to develop each because you almost have to do it independently to figure out what's going to work in each medium. Uh, and I love comics because I think it's not prose, it's not just words, and it's not just pictures. So it's not just books and it's not just movies. It's kind of this marriage between the two. And once you learn how to use the pictures and the words together, is when I think you're really successful with creating a book that people want to read.
I think Robert Kirkman put it perfectly. Where with comics, you're
Who?
Robert Kirkman.
I'm just kidding. Like that little indie
Stop.
creator.
I'm too tired for this. I'm too tired for this. Clearly, I'm too
No,
tired.
I'm just ribbing you.
From my day laying in bed, I'm too tired from this.
Okay.
So he said that comics is the only medium where you use the right side of your brain and the left side of your brain at the exact same time. And you also control a good chunk of like how fast it's read, the actual amount of time that things are being said in, almost you give a lot of, I guess, interpretation to some degree within the frame of a comic book. That's up to the reader, and it's super interesting about that. And I think it's very interesting versus in every other medium, you don't really have control as the viewer or as the reader or as the spectator. In comics, you have a lot more control, and I just think comics are so interesting. And having said all that, I do want to start talking about Vault Comics and Powerless, because that is your first, I think, jump into this. And how'd you even get into Powerless and Vault Comics and that entire thing? Because we're going to get to the story in a second, but it's super interesting. And it's also a little bit hard hitting right now, I think.
It was a little bit ahead of its time, perhaps. I pitched the idea over email. I had been going to the shows for, conventions for a long time, and I pitched, and I bought a bunch of their books and just sort of became a face that they recognized as I went to their booth and read their books and bought them. And so I got their business cards and I just sent them an email that said, "Here it is. I have this idea." And at the time, I had no idea that they were starting to create Vault Comics, pursue this idea of creating monthly comic books. And it kind of hit at the perfect time because they wanted to develop a superhero property, but stand out. And so flipping the idea of superheroes on its head hit exactly where they wanted to be. So I got a response from them. It took a long time sort of in production and getting their artist with Nathan Gooden, and who's a cousin of theirs and part of their family, and developing it that way. But for all you new creators out there who are looking for your break, just the right idea at the right moment with the right people, and that door will crack open slightly. And then you just got to keep that shoulder pushed against it to keep pushing on it to get in there.
And so going beyond that and getting into the story, and as you stated, sort of ahead of its time in many ways, we basically everybody in the world has superpowers. So everybody is normal with superpowers, essentially. And then this virus comes, and it sort of starts taking away people's powers or suppressing it. And I'm not exactly sure the complete effects, but that's sort of the secondary, I think, in many ways. And then people start rebelling, and then there's some civil unrest, and then there's clashes between, groups in society, between their government or a government agency and people due to being, forced into quarantine and lockdowns.
It's so funny. You keep describing that. I'm like, oh, geez, that's like conversations I have on a daily basis now. So the whole kernel of the idea was, I didn't really read X-Men, but I watched the movies. And for me, watching these movies about people who can walk through walls and start fires and move things with their minds, and Magneto with his manipulation of magnetic fields. Um, it's they portray themselves as outcasts, and they certainly are, and they're persecuted and those sorts of things. But I always thought, well, that's the kind of outcast I want to be, who has these enormously powerful, superhuman abilities. It's like, how bad can that really be? So I took that idea and I thought, well, what if the world, everybody had these powers, like everybody was powerful. And what if you were in the minority and you didn't have any of these powers? Like, how do you fight back? Where do you find power when everybody else has it and you don't? So it's kind of this philosophical exploration of what it means to fight for a place in the world and for a little bit of the power that you feel like you can't or don't have, represented through all these enormous, superpowers and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think what's nice about this is that we all sort of start out at a level, and then those levels start getting manipulated up and down, and then we start having equalizers put into place, and so and that's what makes this interesting, because obviously there's things like Astro Cities out there. One of my favorite animes is My Hero Academia.
My Hero Academia, yeah.
And obviously the main character Deku has a rise into the power class versus a downcline out of it. And so this is sort of that, somewhat like that, but sort of the opposite to some degree. And then once we go deeper, we obviously get this entire political discussion and this entire, power struggle and even being represented when you don't have it or it's taken away from you. And now I don't want to say you're unequal, but you're now not in the same class anymore. And so now we have a class, I guess, difference.
It's a class difference. And I always approach the story. I never wonder. It seems like the obvious story to me when you set a world full of superpowers and a few people don't have it. It's the pursuit of getting those powers. Seems like the obvious story. It's like powering up. And I never wanted to tell that story. I always wanted to tell the story of people fighting for a place without redefining themselves as part of the majority. If that makes sense. So stay true to who you are, even if it's caused by this virus that takes away your powers, but fight for your place in society without conforming to what everybody else thinks of is powerful.
Yeah, and then obviously it sort of spins out and it goes in different directions. Sure. And obviously there's fractions of ideas or factions that sort of, I guess, stem out of it. And I really think it's great because this starts out in a traditional sense and then it becomes very heavy politically, gets very philosophical, and you can empathize with every character in here and you understand their point of view and why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that what's really nice about this, and this was your first work, so it's like, obviously, this is why I wanted to talk about this, because it's so interesting to have something so deep and heavy. And obviously, you could read this at its surface level, and then you could dive down deeper. And I like when superhero stuff gets, taken upside down and shaken up. So, but what is that all like for you to really dive into that? Because in many ways, I could go and have an entire discussion and talk about 1984 and throw Fahrenheit 451 into this, and it could fit in really well and into dystopia. And what does it even mean to be a hero is another question that sort of comes out of this entire thing. I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
Yeah, no. So the way I approached every single character was I wanted to humanize the two sides of the debate, right? So I wanted to. The villain is the perfect example. So Hyde is a man who defines himself by power, and he's kind of a fascistic character. But once you dig down, you realize he's actually suffering from a degenerative, arthritis, an arthritic condition where his body is sort of failing him. But he's also a very powerful telekinetic, so he can move things with his mind, including himself. So when things get really bad physically for him, he can still move himself around without a wheelchair. He can still seem like, a normal person. So for him, this virus represents not only taking away his telekinesis, but the deterioration of his physical body. So if he ever caught it, he would. It's going to affect him so much more than just a person who loses the ability to walk through walls. And so it's that level of humanizing even these evil villains in the story that I wanted to bring to everybody. So you might not be able to forgive what he does, but at least you understand where he's coming from. And of course, now, with politics and things as they are, those kind of nuances are kind of lost in the real world. So I'm happy that we included them in the story.
Yeah, and this was written in 2017 before,
right.
People who are watching this eventually and seeing this, and if those are watching right now, obviously.
It was written a couple years before that, actually. So it was before the last administration and just all of the debates and fake news and all that stuff.
Yeah, so, way before COVID. It is
and way before COVID, 4 years before COVID. So, it's. I think people are fatigued with virus stories. So, and they're gonna be gun shy about them. So we'll see, sort of how things move forward. But if I had the chance to redo the story, I don't know. I don't know how much. Never thought about this really, but I don't know how much I would change, honestly. I don't want to say that I predicted how people would react to these things, but just knowing how we've all sort of reacted to the pandemic, it's not that far off to sort of see how the story and our world played out.
Well, there's a selective few comic writers who have predicted a lot of stuff that's happening in society, and Matt Hawkins is among those lists of people.
Sure.
So if you ever read anything like Think Tank or Samaritan, Samaritan is season 5 of House of Cards. I'm just saying it.
Sure.
like legitimately take House of Cards and put Samaritan right next to it, and it's legitimately synonymous. But having said all that, I do want to talk about another project that you got to work on with Vault Comics, and that's Alien Bounty Hunter. And this is a little bit, I think, further away from the entire virus world, and this is also super fascinating because it's obviously Adrian, I think
Wassel, yeah.
Wassel, I didn't get that right. Took three tries, everybody. But obviously, this is fascinating because there's some big money in it. There's some stuff going on. Mark Wahlberg might be wearing a hat. That's cool. Guys don't look at explosions. So he was involved to some degree with that. And obviously, I'm not too sure exactly how you came into all of this, because was this sort of a licensed product, an adaptation? So I know that Mark Wahlberg, and I forgot the other person, was bringing it to screen at that point.
Yeah, so it's Steven Levinson, who created Ballers and Entourage, was part of this along with Wahlberg. So the way I came into it was that the folks at Vault approached me because they had been approached with this idea from their production company, with the idea that the Vault would develop it as a comic first, and then they sort of would bring it to screen. So my screen/comic development started very early on. And of course, we got dragged as soon as this. I loved it. It's funny to think back. We got dragged in the comics media. Oh, so they're just creating storyboards for the movie. And I just thought, first of all, read the comic and then make your judgment. And second of all, everybody I worked with at Vault came together and put our heads together and said, how do we make this the best comic we can make? And then whatever changes that need to be made for the movie, other folks can make them down the road. But we wanted to make a good comic. We wanted to make a good story that fit into a comic book. And I love Alien Bounty Hunter, and I think it's a great, fun story. And so I was thrilled.
We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it because I enjoyed what I've read of it.
Cool.
And I've enjoyed certain parts of it way more than the other parts of it, and I'll explain why, and I'll defend my argument. But before we get into that, I do want to talk about that. You got to work with Adrian as a
Yeah.
co-writer, and so obviously I'm super curious about that before we even get into the story and all that stuff, because obviously co-writing is tricky. Um, or it can be. Sometimes it's easy, you know. So
Yeah.
what was that like? Because obviously you've written single stuff, and then obviously this was a co-writing experience. And so what was working with him like?
It was great. He was very involved in the editorial process. He's very involved as an editor generally with story development. So he was really involved in Powerless, sort of getting that to the place that I think we all wanted it to be, to occupy when it was published. So that co-writing with him was a lot like the editorial process. If I think back sort of the process, I think I took the first stab at some things and he took the first stab at some things, and then we would edit each other, and sort of created it that way. So it was very easy process. We would brainstorm and we would come up with ideas. So it was a very easy collaborative process. And that's what my process has been with everybody I've worked with so far. It's been very collaborative. I've never had a moment where I'm like, oh, you should take my idea. So I'm always open to, better notes and better ideas. So it was good. It was a good process.
In my sector and what I do, and I'm more into the business side of things. I love other people's ideas, and I take a lot of that open as well. And I think the best people and the best ideas come from other people's inputs.
Sure.
And even just going off of that, like what is it like to have somebody looking at your stuff and saying, oh, we could work it here this way and throw this here, and then also getting to look at somebody else's stuff too in the same book, because sometimes, we don't see things that we have written for what they are, if they're good or bad. And I'm sure you've had like days where you're just like, this is not great, because everybody has those days. And so what is that like, just to also just get somebody to say, hey, maybe we could look at it like this, and then he's like, oh, that's brilliant, and then it sort of turns a light onto something.
Yeah, it's like 50% excitement and 50% despair, honestly. So yeah, early on it's a challenge to take feedback sometimes. And when you're first starting out, it's definitely a really big challenge when decision makers have ideas that you don't necessarily jibe with. So you'd want to hold on to what's your vision for the story. And then, of course, it very much depends on the messenger. Who's giving you the notes? How are they presented to you? Are they walking papers? Are they suggestions? Are there compliments in there? Or,
are they marching orders?
Yeah, they're the marching orders. In other words, do you do this, or we're not doing the project, or you need to take these notes? And
especially, sorry to interrupt, but obviously this was sort of already from the start that, hey, they wanted to bring this to theater or to like an HBO show or something along those lines. So obviously, I don't know how much freedom was granted to you from the start, but there might have been sometimes when people do stuff like this, knowing they want to go into a film or a TV show, they need certain things in that book. And there's no getting around it. And even though it might look stupid, they need it in that book purposely. Or maybe somebody has a better business idea where they know that if this thing gets greenlit and this main character is there in issue 2, that it's going to be money in the bank, and it's going to sell the book, and it's also going to sell the show. And then like there's marketing appeal. And so obviously, but continue. Sorry for interrupting. I thought adding to it.
Sure. So I think it was part ideas that we were given, and a lot of it was ideas that we came up with and presented to the decision makers and said, we think this is how this story will be unique and interesting and different. And a lot of the time it was, this is a great idea, go with it. If they want to do something different in the movie, they certainly can do that. So it's not like adapting something that already exists out there and you sort of have to take the pieces and parts and be and honor the source material while sort of adapting it to something new. It was very much the source material was the kernel of the idea, and it was up to us to build around it. And then they would take what we did, excuse me, they would take what we did and adapt it to what they needed, take what they needed, leave what they didn't, and create new if they needed to. So we had an extreme amount of freedom, given that it was coming from a place of creation, not pre-existing IP, making it something new and different.
And that's a real advantage in many ways.
Huge.
Many ways, because you don't have to. You have rules, but you have a hell of a lot less rules than if you were adapting, a movie into a comic book adaptation. And having said all that, we've been avoiding it, and so let's get into it. Some of this might make sense once we start talking about the story. We got a bounty hunter named Ben who basically has to go track down a creature in a city that most people doesn't even know exists. And the bounty's just too high for him to resist. And, well, the way the story goes is that he's got to get into the city, and then he's in the city, then he has to do, like, another thing to get into another part of the city, and then so on and so forth to find his creature, his man, whatever we want to call what it is.
His mark.
That's a good way to put it. And so the way I view it is that it's almost like leveling up in a video game. We have to do a bunch of side quests to get your person and finish the game. And, well, certain things happen, and he meets some allies, and he makes some enemies along the way. And so what was this entire thing like building this out? Because obviously it progresses in a way, and it's very relatable, and that's how I read it. I read it very much like a video game. First thing,
that's
somebody
cool.
else might read it very differently.
Yeah, so the way we designed the underground city was we had each ward that was based upon some different, like the streets of India, and then the favelas in Brazil, the cities that are built on the side of the hill. We designed one that way, and then just creating, using inspiration from different areas of the world to create these different wards, which were created by the different species of alien that live sort of down there. And so it's interesting that you talk about it leveling up, because I do kind of Canto is a similar way. I describe the one shots as side quests. We have the main quest, and then we have these little side quests. And like it or not, I guess that's sort of our language nowadays is, video games are movies, and comics are video games, and movies are TV shows, and it's just like we talk in terms of story, and whether it's levels, side quests, all that.
I view everything in a unique way. I saw a show called Samurai Flamenco, and if anybody knows it, it's a weird. The guy, the director, is a guy named Omori, and he does Bakano, he does Durara, and he likes this idea of like circular logic, where everything goes in a circle, or it's the concept that like a show's inside a show, and you don't know what's real and what's not till like the last few episodes, and it's brilliant because once you understand what he's doing, you're like, oh, I get it now. And that's how I view all of this, in which that I've come to the conclusion that I'm a big anime fan, I'm a big wrestling fan, I love comic books, and I play a lot of video games. And I view all of it as the same, just in different formats, where it's all the same. And so once you take that approach to how you view media, it becomes very different on how you see it. And that's one of the things that I really like about this comic, and the world itself, I find to be the best part of this entire comic, because it's so rich. These worlds and these wards, and how we're getting so much different, places that like I just kind of want to hang out in this city.
I love it.
You can go transport yourself, and like you're going from ward, I guess, 1 to ward 2 to ward 5, and like they're all different. And so that's my favorite part of this entire comic, is the world itself. And I would love for that world to be explored, because I love the entire world. I think you killed it as a writer, the two of you, in the world building in particular. And it's my favorite part of this entire comic.
Yeah, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we get the opportunity. There's another part of this story that we've discussed that will speak to your um, enjoyment of the world building. So I'm not going to say anything else about it. I don't know if there's any plans in the pipeline at this point, but hopefully someday we'll get the sequel to Alien Bounty Hunter 2, Hunt Harder or whatever.
Now, you already mentioned it, and I'm not going to push you on Alien Bounty Hunter in particular, but I do want to talk about Kanto, which is why we're all here. And so, obviously, Kanto is one of these stories that sort of came out of nowhere, I think is safe to say. And then what wound up happening is it exploded and it's become big and obviously became like sort of the go-to comic, I think, in 2019, I think is when it came out. And so how did this even come about? How did you meet Drew? And what is the entire story behind this? Because obviously IDW picked it up, or I don't know if it was picked up straight from IDW, and what's like the entire story of how this entire thing came into conception?
Sure. So
I know it's a big question. It's a big question.
yeah,
I know.
I'm just thinking back now. You're digging into the archives, and I'm like, I can't even remember what
Something
happened
like
at
2 years
breakfast.
ago. 2 years ago.
Oh, I know, and I can't remember what happened yesterday. So there's a lot. There's a lot of information just going in and out of my brain. So I was aware of Drew because I read a book of his. I think I might have it here. Yeah. Uh, so he and Philip Sevey created this book called The House, which I think is fantastic, and his art is just terrific in here. Drew's. And so I read it and I really liked it. And I was working at the time on a short and I needed an artist. So I reached out to Drew and I said, hey, are you available? I'd love to have you on this. And he messaged me back and he said he was finishing the house. So he didn't have time. It's like, darn it. Okay, fine. Moved on. But then after he was done, he emailed me a concept drawing of what eventually would become our little hero. This isn't the concept drawing. This is totally finished drawing. But he emailed me a little early on concept of who would become Kanto, and he had an idea for a kind of adultish story, and he wanted to know if I wanted to team up, and within seconds of seeing the design, even though I went through a few iterations after that, I said, I don't know who this little character is or what his story is, but we're telling it. Seconds of seeing it, I was like, this is it. I'm doing this. And so we talked more. He gave me sort of his idea for the story, and it was very Dante's Inferno and kind of adultish. And I wanted to do a all ages book, so I went back. I took my love of Wizard of Oz. I'm not sure if you can see it in here, but this is a 1901 copy of the Wizard of Oz, right there. So I've loved Wizard of Oz for a very long time. So I took it and I thought, okay, well, here's the Tin Man. What can we do? And then I put together a story, and one of the choices that I made very, very early in story development was I wanted this character. He's already cute as hell, right? I wanted this character to then have a quest where he wasn't going to help himself, but I wanted him to go help somebody else. And so that's where we started, that the story of him and his beloved, and having clocks, and then he's got to go out and find her heart. That choice, it wasn't his heart that he had to find, it was her heart he had to find. I just knew in my gut that was something that people could rally around because it's a completely unselfish act that he's going to do. And that's sort of where it came from there. We used Dante's Inferno as an inspiration for some of the world. Wizard of Oz was inspiration for some of the plot that he was encountering.
Just a little bit, right? Just a little bit, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. There was somebody, I want to say in CBR, that did a whole analysis of the sort of implicit references to Inferno and Wizard of Oz, and they just nailed every single thing that we took together and mashed up to make this new story. So we were not we used it as inspiration. We were not beholden to really any of it. So yeah, that's how it
There's a
happened.
lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack. So
Okay.
obviously, my next question is, when did IDW come into this? Because IDW, for those who don't know, and I don't think they're going to mind because I don't think it's a secret, they do a lot of licensed products.
Yeah,
They do
tons.
Ghostbusters, Sonic the Hedgehog, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, other stuff too. I don't know if Our Revolution is licensed or if that's original, but they do a bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
The Transformers is licensed, and that's
My
what they're
Little
known.
Pony, Care Bears. We're
Yeah,
basically all
so,
the Hasbro properties they have.
which are great, and then they're great.
Yeah.
You know, if you love Hasbro and you run into Target and you buy your Transformer toy, you should probably pick up IDW's Transformers.
Yeah,
It's great.
sure.
That's a quick plug for them right there. So, but Kanto is original, versus it is not a traditional IDW book. And so when did
Right.
they come into it? Because obviously they're, I don't know, IDW, are they like the fourth largest publisher at this point? Or they're fourth or fifth, I think.
Yeah,
In the,
somewhere in there. They're right there with sort of Boom Dark Horse, IDW. Image is kind of above all of them, I think. But um yeah, so I spent a lot of time sort of networking at conventions and stuff and meeting editors because I've said this a bunch of times, but when I'm pitching, when I wanted to pitch a book, um, I never wanted to just throw it into the abyss and hope that I get the abyss talks back to me. So I always wanted to have a person that I could email at different publishers. And this is a funny story because we had our buddy Ben Bishop, who's draws Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he's on Last Ronin right now, and just terrific and such a great guy. And he knew one of the editors over at IDW, so he introduced us. And I thought, okay, Andrew, we are in. We've got it slicked. We're ready to get it approved. And the editor emailed back and he's like, "Oh, great! I'll send it over to the committee, the selection committee." And I thought, well, damn it! Now we're going into the wood chipper, and we're going to come out as nothing but shreds on the other side. And so we were actually talking with a much smaller publisher for quite a long time about publishing Kanto. And IDW came back with an email that said, "Hey, the committee really likes this. They think it would fit with what they're doing. Would you be interested?" And of course, we sent back a cool email like, let's think about it. No, I'm just kidding. We were like, yes, let's do it. So this was 2018. And I think at that time, there was an initiative to bring in creator-owned books at IDW. So like Rich Douek with Sea of Sorrow or Road of Bones was 2019. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, but there were some other creator-owned ones that came out in 2019 with the sort of class. So yeah, that's what we did. And I think IDW was a great home for Kanto because it felt to me like it was a creator-owned book, which they wanted to do, but it also had that kind of Hasbro-esque, feel to it that it could very well have been a Hasbro toy that now has a comic book. So it kind of checked all the boxes for them. And they responded to the story. Nobody had any idea if it would perform the way that it has performed. So
yeah,
we all hoped
let's
for
talk
the
about
best.
that.
We planned for the worst. We hoped for the best. We planned for the worst.
So let's talk about that, because one of the things that we were speaking about before is that Kanto had before we went live, Kanto had an extremely low print run. There's a reason why that book in raw form is worth money and in graded form is worth money. There's two different versions. There's the crease in the back and on the spine version, and there's really good versions. And obviously one of those has lesser than the others. But it had an extremely low print run. And so obviously that, I'm pretty sure IDW was extremely happy when there was an over demand for it. It went into a second printing and then also went into a third printing. So
Yeah.
what was that like for you as a writer? Because that's a big deal. when that happens.
I
And when
mean,
people dance.
well, it was just mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling. So I can tell you that we spent a lot of time pounding the pavement. I went through before Kanto was announced in March of 2019. It was coming out in June. I went to all these creator friends that I knew that had cachet with their names, and I got all these quotes, and then I would just start posting on social media a quote from each person. Don't forget to pre-order Kanto, and just put quote like, Steve Orlando says this, and Delilah S. Dawson said this, and just pounding the pavement. So it became familiar to readers, hopefully, by the time it came out. Then the comics collectors market really, really got strongly behind it, and they just were talking amongst each other, you better get this book. So we still didn't have any idea before it came out what was going to happen. And then the Tuesday before it was released on Wednesday, June 22nd of 2019, or 26th of 2019, a day that will live in my heart. The day before, an article came out on Nerdist, I want to say, and it said, these are the 5 books that you should pick up for New Comic Book Day tomorrow. And it was Marvel, DC, DC, Kanto. And I thought, I had some friends message me when they saw that, and they're like, holy sh. And I didn't even.
You can say shit on here. It's the internet.
Holy shit. I know, it's my all ages book, and I'm swearing on the podcast. So, but they just messaged me and were like, holy smokes, what is happening? And Drew and I are just looking at shit like, what's happening? And then the morning it came out, I went to a shop with the day it opens, or the morning, the hour that it opened, to sign the copies, because I just thought, I'll stop in. It's a neighborhood shop. And I signed all these copies, and they had a big stack of them. And I thought, oh geez, I sure hope they sell through them. And they did another signing at another shop at 5 p.m. And they had to pull the book from out behind the counter because they had people coming in and buying like stacks of them. And every shop had marked them up day of, and just were trying to stop people from like hoarding them so we could have readers. So
I was lucky to get a copy, I got my copy from Midtown the day of, and I was lucky to get it, and I ordered it in a diner of all places by Oh Yeah Comics, and that's Drew's shop apparently. So yeah. Throwing that out there. So
and I don't want people to think that this is just all it was an amazing thing that happened, but you have to think about it from both a buzz and a reader perspective. The print run was only like 7,000 or something for the first book. And by the time it hit shelves on Wednesday, nobody could buy the book to experience the story until the second print came out. So we literally had a ceiling, unless you did it digitally, and I guess you could find it that way. But we literally had a print ceiling of 7,000 copies for readers to pick up and try the new series. So as great as it is for news and media and all that stuff to get this big buzzy sellout, we needed to bring in readers. So
it almost feels like a double sword, because
double-edged sword, exactly.
Here you have the craziest situation where you have all this buzz and all this drive and all this attention, yet you only have 7,000, and at the same time, the people who are buying it, maybe some of them are reading it and picking it up by chance. I mean, I took a risk on Kanto. I didn't even know how big it was going to be from where it was. And I'm like, oh, this book seems interesting, and there's a little bit of buzz. It seems like a really cool story. And then it was just like, oh, now this looks cool. I read my copy, and I treated it nicely. But then what wound up happening is that I'm like, oh, snap, this book's worth serious money. Probably shouldn't have read it. And so you have this situation where now there's all eyes on you. IDW must be happy to some degree because they're getting a boatload of attention because
Hmm.
the tension trickles down, but then at the same time, you're not bringing in new readers now, possibly for an issue two at the same time.
Right. So luckily we had a second and third printing come out, like you mentioned, and we were able to start getting, readers who missed it and who wanted to read it. We started getting them in there. Um, and we got we've done our job. I guess I'll say that. We've done our job because when Canto 2 came out in August, the pre-orders just blew us all out of the water. We were prepared for that with the print run, so we didn't have to go to a second printing, so we met the demand, but it was so much higher than what we originally had anticipated for Canto 1. So we've been able to bring in the readers and sort of keep them there. So that initial, you know, that initial release uh, was all the excitement did not uh, put a damper on sort of the success of the book ultimately with readers.
And I think one of the reasons why this book is successful is that this book is an all age book, as you stated. It's got Dante's Inferno is infused in with The Wizard of Oz, with some other ideas as well. I also feel, and you could call me a traditionalist, you could call me, old school, but I'm 28 and I remember reading stories when I was a kid, very much like Canto, where they're just
Cool.
a story that's about a brave individual who is fearless, who's doing something because it's the right thing to do. And Canto has an objective. Canto wants to save his lover. It's not, it's a little bit selfish, but it's also very selfless in many ways. And we just get this idea of facing your fears also and going on an adventure. And,
Mm-hmm.
I hate to say this, and obviously people are going to take it however they take it, but I feel like stories today are way more complicated than they need to be, and that we don't
Oh,
have.
it's way more complicated. There's one of the things that I hate is there's the huge info dump at the beginning of a lot of fantasy stories where it's just
And
world
also,
building.
this is like just like the core values in many ways of just being a decent person to
Yeah.
some degree. And so that like I think that's why it's also gravitated, because we're in a society, going back to I think 2016 all the way to now, and even 2010, we make the argument where there's too much stuff being thrown at us. We're in a
Yeah.
society where people are leaving social media and they want to think clearer and they want to like read a book and not be connected. And I feel like Canto's that disconnect and it fills that void. And even though it's an all age book, and I don't know if this is your intention or if I'm completely missing it here, and that's my interpretation, but this is how I view it, is that I feel like, okay, we're just going back to what's always worked, and people gravitate towards simplicity. And so obviously, and then also it's got things like The Wizard of Oz. Canto looks like the Tin Man. He's
It
got a
feels familiar. Yeah.
he's looking for a heart. The Tin Man wants a heart. We
Mhm.
have, going to the Emerald Tower, Yellow Mountain. We got all this stuff in there that is so Wizard of Oz, like that people know what it is too. And I think it's great. And then also got like this tiny little apple. He's adorable also. And that's what makes this crazy, is that his quest is at a very difficult level, and yet he's adorable. And that also helps tremendously. And so I think that's why this story is successful. And obviously, I'm right, because there's Canto 2, not issue 2, but there's an entire sequel to this. And then
Yeah.
it's been greenlit for, I think, another series or maybe even a fourth series. So,
We just got greenlit for three more stories. So we'll be carried through 2022. So in April, we're going with a 3-issue mini, which is kind of a side quest, as we talked about, called Canto in the City of Giants. And we're bringing in a guest artist, Sebastian Perez, who I love. I love his art. So Drew can actually, Drew's doing some covers, but Drew is going to be, it frees him up to work on Canto 3, which is a big 6-issue sort of epic story arc called Lionhearted. And then right on the heels of that, we're doing another 6 issues called Canto 4, A Place Like Home. So there's a little Wizard of Oz reference going on with these 4 story arcs, if you if you can pick it up.
And so I don't want to push too much on the story of Canto because I actually want people to read it. I know it's, the first two I think are out in I think the first one's out in graphic novel. Is Canto 2 done yet, or is it still going on?
I think the last issue comes out next Wednesday, so a week from today, and the trade for Canto 2 of the Hollow Men comes out in May. So it's right around the same time that we start with City of Giants and sort of keep going from there.
And the reason why I don't want to push any further is because obviously things happen in these stories. There are consequences. Things aren't, all hunky dory. It is an old age book, but it is also adult, and there are consequences for actions. And I don't want to ruin that story for too many people. But let's just say that there is a decision made at the end of the first arc that affects the second, and then things happen in the second, and I'm assuming that more things are going to happen in the third and fourth arcs.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
I mean, it's all going to stay all ages, but the idea is that there are different layers to the story that, as an adult, you can take and interpret with your world experience. And kids can read it and they can enjoy the story, and maybe they take something different when they're 9, 10 than when they're 14 and when they're 21, and that sort of thing.
and I've read Canto on every single level, and I'm going to just leave it at that. The first book.
Good.
It's so I love it from the basic all the way down to the dark side. So obviously I like it. It also helps that I have a Canto one, so in pretty good shape. So no complaints from me. So having said all that, I'm going to throw this idea out there. We're all just waiting for some type of anime series, some type of film, some Netflix stuff happening. Hopefully that'll happen sooner rather than later. I know you can neither confirm nor deny that that's on the table, but as a film guy and as somebody who did screenwriting, I mean, that's got to be like the ultimate goal here is to really get to do that project and take this comic from where it sits right now into a whole nother medium, because it's perfect for it. It's so perfect for it.
Well, I appreciate that, Andrew. I can neither confirm nor deny.
It's somewhere hopefully coming down the pipe.
Well, yeah. I mean, so I'll say this. Drew and I always set out to make a terrific comic that we would love to read, that we would buy. And I think we've succeeded in that. And if Canto tomorrow or next month or a year from now or 5 years from now makes the leap from the page to the screen, big or small, whatever might happen, it's a bonus for us, and we would love that story just as much as we love the comic that we've created. But each step is sort of, it's just I'm just treading water here, bud. We would love to see that. We would love to see that happen. Who knows? We would love to see it happen.
Well, one of the things that I think that is the perfect way how to sum it up is that you are probably very stoked that you got your first 6 issues done, and then you got greenlit for a second, and then greenlit for arc 3 and 4. It is a big deal because obviously in the world of comics, it is super hard to get off the ground and also get a major publisher interested in you.
Sure.
And so everything at this point with Canto for you is just gravy, because and so it's cool whatever happens next with Canto. If they're interested in doing a 5th arc, that's just gravy. And all those minis, at this point, you set out and you achieved what you wanted to do, and now you're just riding the ride as far as it can go. And I know that sounds sort of diminishing, but I think it really kind of hits it, because you have told a great 6-issue story, and then what I've seen, and I'm probably gonna pick up the trade in May of Canto 2, is I've seen a piece of the art and it looks great too, and like the story's just continuing, and it's awesome when you get to tell the story you want to tell, versus having somebody telling you what to tell.
Yeah, and you're exactly right that success is so elusive in comics, and it's success beyond the first arc. We always envision the story to be 4 big story arcs to tell Kanto's full adventure. We were satisfied with what happened in the first arc. We always intended for it to go longer. So the so I just want to say thank you to all the readers out there who have picked it up and who've continued with us. We are now we're 12 issues in. We're about to be 12 issues in, and the readership, we've gotten a steady readership to the point where it's an engine that will keep this story being told, and that's the only way that it happens. So the only reason we are even here is because the readers have chosen to stick with us. So thank you to everybody out there who's stuck with the story. We are thrilled to be able to continue, and we will keep doing it as long as you'll put up with us. So there we are.
And on that note, I definitely want to back out of Kanto, and I'm very excited for where it's going. It's going to be super exciting to see, somebody else get to work on it also. And then obviously 3 and 4 are coming in. There's a bunch of one-shots that are out there as well for anybody who wants more of Kanto in between arcs and stuff. And we've got that 3 mini coming up. But I do want to ask you a super quick question before I give you the opportunity to self-promote yourself. And that's talking about COVID, cons, and all of that stuff. And obviously, I ask everybody on this show, and over 100 people have answered, whether it's wrestling or Comic-Cons or even voice acting. How has COVID affected you, and where do you think it's going as far as comics go and even conventions? Because we've seen all of 2020 where cons have been just done. I mean, I don't know. I don't know another word that can describe it where it is a disaster. In New York Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, Emerald City Comic-Con, WonderCon, those are sort of engines in the comic world, and they didn't happen in 2020. And I don't know if they're going to happen in 2021. And I'm very pessimistic, which means I'm always right. So eventually.
So, I mean, I'm on board with that. I don't know how conventions happen in 2021. It'll, I think, be a state by state type thing, but I don't see San Diego happening. I would not see the Pacific Northwest having any, like Rose City or or Emerald City. New York, it's tough.
Also at the same volume as well, where I don't.
Oh yeah, they would definitely be reduced volume, 25-50%.
I don't see a 100,000 person con ever coming back. I just don't see it happening because I think that the city of New York, the city of LA, the city of San Diego Comic-Con, it's just going to say, fuck no. I legitimately seriously think that.
I think if we get a handle on the virus, you will see the convention sort of come back in their full capacity, but it's going to be a gradual thing. It's not going to be just 2021 done.
It's going to take time.
I miss the conventions. I wonder sometimes how 2020 would look for us as creators if we had conventions. But I also think some of the opportunities that I've gotten are the result of stripping away all the sort of the pomp and circumstance of being a creator, spending time at conventions, tabling, going to lunches, dinners, doing drinks, all of that stuff with other creatives. You can't do any of that. So all you have left is writing and talking about stories. And so to me, for me in 2020, it stripped away all the extraneous stuff and made me focus on stories and being successful. And I'm honestly really excited about where I'm going personally as a writer in 2021. And that's due in part to the focus that I have had and the people I'm working with have had in 2020. So yes, it's all terrible. Everything's on fire. But there is a silver lining to it, which is it's forced all of us as creatives to focus on what really matters, and that's telling good stories.
And I also will add to that because of 2020, I've actually 3x'd my interview output. I used to do 30 interviews a year. Now I did last year 90, and this year I'm doing 150. And
that's awesome.
I'm beyond track on that. I'm actually ahead of schedule, which is crazy. And the people I've met, the opportunities that I've gotten, people that I got to interview, the people that I get to speak to. If this was a regular season and 2020 was regular and we didn't have, COVID, this would never have happened, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that the game has changed now, very much. And I think that more of this stuff is here to stay, because I think people
totally
long form conversations. And also I know how hard tabling can be, and cons do take a toll on people. And so I think that certain things are going to be lessened, because I think that people are, starting to realize that they could accomplish the exact same stuff with half the effort through the internet. And they could sell 4 times as many books through the internet with just a little bit of marketing. And so I think this, and I think also this is part of it. And now, having said all that, I'm sure we could have like an hour conversation on that alone. But I know you have somewhat of a heart out, and I know I'm a little bit over, and I know you're tolerating it.
That's it.
But I do want to give you an opportunity to promote yourself. What is going on with Canto? What can you say? I mean, you mentioned some of it already. Any other projects that I might have missed, or anything that's coming out major, or anything you would like to promote? Social media. You have a website, Instagram, TikTok, if you're on it. Twitter. Super important stuff.
My TikTok. No, I don't have TikTok, but you can find me on Twitter at David Booher. You can find me on Instagram at David M. Booher. You can look me up on Facebook if you want. Canto is on Twitter and Instagram at Canto Comic, so that's where a lot of the updates are for what's going on with Canto. We talked about the story arcs that are coming. That's what's been announced. I'm hard at work on some things that I hope we'll be able to talk about very soon with some other publishers and other folks. I'm very excited. I think I'm going to have a lot of single issue comics coming out in 2021. I just trying to.
You can't say it yet. We're going to leave it at that.
I hate it's like vague tweeting, but out loud, and I hate that. So I don't want to say, "Oh, I can't say anything," because of course I can talk about it if I wanted to. But it's just a little premature to discuss details about some of the things that I'm working on. But if everybody follows me on.
The answer then is that they have to follow you on social media.
Right. So follow me on social media, and you'll be the first to know when some exciting things happen, and it won't be too long before we'll be able to talk about all this stuff.
So on that note, obviously, and I've been saying this to everybody, you have to follow people on social media. It's super important, especially during COVID. And following people on social media is free. You have options: Instagram, Twitter, check out websites, Facebook, all that stuff is free, and it's super important. And also, as far as information goes, I mean, obviously, it's a little premature to talk about certain books, but even talking about what's going on with Canto and all that Canto stuff was announced on social media as well. So if you want to be informed on what's going on with Canto, you should be following on social media as well. And obviously, David mentioned all those links and his links on social media, as well as you should go buy an issue of Canto, buy the trade. Obviously, look out in May. Canto is the Hollow Men, I think.
2, yeah. Canto 2 is the Hollow Men.
And so that's coming out in May. Obviously, you should probably go to your local comic shop and either order it or ask them to order it. I'm sure that if you ask nicely, they will. And that's super important. It's a great jumping on point, because then Canto 3 is going to start, or the mini is going to start. So obviously do all that, and obviously also buy a bunch of other comics too. Check out Vault Comics and what they do. And a bunch of stuff. This is also digitally. If you don't want to go to a store and you just want to read it, definitely a bunch of this stuff is digital. So you could also do that. And so it's super important to do both those things. And so that's what I'm encouraging everybody to do, especially Canto, because Canto is just an amazing comic. If there's one comic you read this year, read Canto, the first 6 issues, pick it up, and I don't think you'll be disappointed, because I love it, and it's also a really cool book. And if you have a Canto, go get it graded. Also,
that Canto #1. Do not read it. Buy the trade, so you can get your fingerprints on that and keep the issue 1 as nice as you can.
So on that note, after encouraging everybody to go do that, and I just threw CGC some money. So maybe I'm owed a kickback from them. I think we're gonna end there. I'm gonna give you the final word.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in, and thank you for everybody who picked up Canto already, everybody who will pick up Canto after this, and stay tuned. There's lots more adventure in store.